It was a gloomy autumn evening when Dr. Samuel Reich closed his clinic, the dim streetlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The day had been grueling, a steady stream of patients leaving him physically drained, but thankful for his purpose as a healer. Yet, despite his exhaustion, Samuel's mind was restless. Tonight marked the 7th anniversary of his daughter Maya's tragic death. The wound of losing her, a vibrant, sharp-witted girl who had barely turned 18, never truly healed. Her laughter had once filled their modest home, but now it echoed only in his memories. As he drove through the quiet streets of town, the radio crackled faintly in the background. He wasn't listening, his thoughts consumed by flashes of Maya's face, her warm, brown eyes, her radiant smile, and the delicate silver necklace she had always worn. The necklace had a small charm engraved with the word "Forever," a gift Samuel had given her on her 16th birthday. After her passing, it was the one item missing among her belongings, leaving him with an ache of unanswered questions. Samuel sighed, shaking himself free of the memories as he pulled into the driveway. He cut the engine and sat in silence for a moment, the weight of grief pressing on his chest like it always did on this date. As he stepped out of the car, the crisp autumn air bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. His thoughts lingered on the ghost of his daughter and a life they'd never get to share. He was about to head inside when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw a number he didn't recognize. Usually he let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something compelled him to answer this time. "Hello," he said, his voice cautious. The line crackled before a woman's voice responded, hurried and urgent. "Dr. Wright, you don't know me, but I need your help. I don't have much time to explain, but it's about Maya." Samuel froze, his heart thudding in his chest. "Maya?" he echoed, his voice trembling. "Who is this? What are you talking about?" "Please," the woman whispered. "Come to Street Catherine's shelter. She's here. I swear to you, your daughter is alive." The call ended abruptly, leaving Samuel standing in stunned silence. He stared at his phone, his breath quickening. It couldn't be possible. Maya had been declared dead. He had identified her body himself. He remembered the coldness of her lifeless skin, the sterile chill of the morgue. There was no mistake. Yet, the urgency in the woman's voice planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Against his better judgment, Samuel grabbed his coat and got back into the car, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. The drive to Street Catherine's shelter felt like a blur, his heart racing with every mile. He tried to reason with himself. It had to be a cruel joke, a misunderstanding, or even someone trying to scam him. But deep down, a sliver of hope burned. A dangerous, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, the impossible could be true. When he arrived, the shelter was quiet, its peeling paint and flickering sign giving it a neglected appearance. Samuel stepped inside, his nerves on edge. The receptionist at the front desk gave him a wary look. "I'm looking for someone," he said, his voice firm despite the chaos in his mind. "I was told my daughter might be here." The woman hesitated, then nodded toward a door down the hall. "Someone will explain. Wait there." Samuel's legs felt heavy as he walked down the dimly lit hallway, each step echoing ominously. When he pushed open the door, his breath caught in his throat. Sitting on a worn-out couch was a young woman. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes slightly tattered, but there was no mistaking the familiar curve of her jawline or the fire in her brown eyes. "Maya." Samuel's voice cracked as he spoke her name. The woman looked up, her eyes widening with recognition. "Dad." The world seemed to tilt, the air rushing out of Samuel's lungs. He stumbled forward, reaching out to touch her to confirm she was real. But as he got closer, his gaze fell to her neck, and his blood ran cold. There it was, the necklace he had given her, the charm glinting faintly in the dim light. It was impossible. He had searched for it after her death, convinced it had been stolen or lost. Before he could speak, a low voice from the corner of the room interrupted. "Dr. Wright, we need to talk. Now." Samuel turned sharply, his panic rising as he saw a man in a dark suit step forward, his face grim. "You don't understand," the man said. "Maya's return isn't a miracle. It's a warning." Samuel's mind reeled, questions flooding him faster than he could process. His daughter was alive, sitting right in front of him, yet something was deeply, unsettlingly wrong. The man gestured for him to step outside, leaving Samuel torn between confronting the stranger and staying with Maya. "Dad," Maya said, her voice trembling. "Please, don't leave me." Her plea shattered him, but he couldn't ignore the tension in the air, the unspoken danger hanging over them. Samuel turned to the man, his fists clenched. You better start explaining, he growled, his fear giving way to anger. The man's expression darkened. You think you lost your daughter 7 years ago, but the truth is far more complicated than you could ever imagine. Samuel's chest tightened, a storm of emotions churning within him. The words hung in the air, ominous and heavy, as he turned back to Maya. In her eyes, he saw fear, pain, and something else he couldn't quite place, something that made his heart pound with dread. The necklace glinted again, catching the faint light, as if it held answers he wasn't ready to face. Samuel's mind raced as he stood frozen in the doorway, caught between the man's cryptic warning and the sight of his daughter, alive, breathing, and looking at him with pleading eyes. For years, he had replayed the day he lost her, every detail etched into his memory. The phone call, the drive to the morgue, the unbearable moment when he identified her body. And yet, here she was, flesh and blood, wearing the necklace he had thought was gone forever. How can this be? He finally whispered, his voice cracking. The man in the suit stepped closer, his presence unnerving. Dr. Wright, I understand how overwhelming this must be, but you need to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but it's the truth. Maya's survival wasn't an accident. Samuel's jaw tightened, his instincts as a father flaring. You better start making sense, he snapped, because right now all I see is my daughter. And if you think I'm going to let some stranger pull me away from her, it's not that simple. The man interrupted, his tone sharp but controlled. Maya's life, her death, her return. They're all connected to something far bigger than you realize. You need to know the truth, or you'll never be able to protect her. Samuel turned back to Maya, his heart aching at the confusion and fear on her face. She looked so much like the girl he had lost, yet something about her was different, almost guarded. He knelt in front of her, desperate to bridge the years that had been stolen from them. Maya, he said softly, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. I don't understand what's happening, but I need you to tell me, are you okay? Where have you been all this time? Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched his hands tightly. Dad, I don't know how to explain it. I remember everything up until that night. The car crash, the cold, and then nothing. It's all a blur. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a place I didn't recognize. They told me I couldn't leave, that I wasn't ready. I didn't even know how much time had passed until recently. Her words sent a chill down Samuel's spine. Who are they? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before she could answer, the man in the suit cut in. Dr. Wright, I suggest we move this conversation somewhere more secure. This isn't the place to discuss. Enough. Samuel snapped, his frustration boiling over. You keep talking in circles, but you're not saying anything. Who are you, and what do you know about my daughter? The man hesitated for a moment, then sighed heavily. My name is Agent Carter. I work with a specialized branch of the government, one that deals with unusual cases. Maya's disappearance and return fall under our jurisdiction. We've been monitoring her since the day she reappeared. Monitoring her. Samuel's voice rose, his anger barely contained. She's not some experiment or case file. She's my child. And that's exactly why I'm here. Carter replied, his tone firm. Because what's happening to her is far from normal. Maya isn't just at risk. So are you and anyone else who gets too close. Samuel's stomach churned. He turned back to Maya, searching her face for answers. Is this true? Have they been watching you? She nodded reluctantly, her grip on his hands tightening. They wouldn't leave me alone, Dad. Everywhere I went, they were there. I tried to run, but they always found me. I think they're afraid of me. Afraid of you? Samuel's mind reeled. None of this made sense. Maya had always been a bright, compassionate girl, full of life and curiosity. What could possibly make her a threat? Carter stepped forward, his expression grim. Dr. Wright, we don't have much time. Maya's return isn't just a miracle. It's connected to something we've been tracking for years. There are forces at play here that you can't begin to understand. If we go back now, you could lose her all over again. Samuel stared at him, his thoughts a chaotic swill of fear, anger, and disbelief. What kind of forces? He asked, his voice shaking. You keep talking in riddles. Just tell me the truth. Carter hesitated, then glanced at Maya. It's better as she shows you. Maya's breath hitched, and she shook her head violently. No, I can't. I don't want him to see. Samuel's heart ached at the pain in her voice, but he knelt beside her, his hands on her shoulders. Maya, whatever it is, we'll face it together. I need to know what's happening to you. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes, her lower lip trembling. After a long moment, she nodded. Slowly, she reached up and touched the necklace around her neck. The charm glinted faintly in the dim light, and as her fingers brushed against it, something remarkable happened. The air around her seemed to ripple, like heat rising off pavement on a summer day. Samuel felt a strange pressure in his chest, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, in an instant, the ripple ceased and the light in the room dimmed. Maya's eyes glowed faintly, an otherworldly golden hue that made Samuel's blood run cold. Her hands trembled as she clutched the necklace, her voice barely audible. This is why they're afraid of me." Samuel stumbled back, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. "Maya, what is this? What's happening to you?" Carter stepped forward, his voice calm but urgent. "This is what I've been trying to tell you. Maya isn't the same as she was before. Whatever happened to her after the crash, wherever she was, it changed her." Samuel shook his head, his hands trembling. "No, this isn't possible. She's my daughter. She's human." "She was," Carter said carefully, "but now she's something more." Maya's glow faded as she let go of the necklace, her eyes returning to their familiar brown. She looked at Samuel, her expression filled with shame and fear. "I didn't ask for this, Dad. I don't even know what I am anymore." Samuel felt his legs give out, and he sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. Everything he thought he knew about the world, about life and death, was unraveling before his eyes. His daughter, his Maya, was alive, but she was also a stranger. Carter cleared his throat, breaking the heady silence. "Dr. Wright, I know this is overwhelming, but we don't have time to dwell on the why or how. There are others out there, people who would do anything to exploit Maya's abilities. If we don't act now, they'll find her, and they won't stop until they have her." Samuel looked up, his eyes filled with desperation. "What do you expect me to do? I'm just a doctor. I don't know how to protect her from whatever this is." Carter placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We can help you, but only if you trust me. Right now, the most important thing is keeping Maya safe." Samuel glanced at his daughter, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and fear. He didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. He would do whatever it took to protect her. "Fine," he said, his voice steady. "But you better tell me everything. No more secrets." Carter nodded, agreed, "But first, we need to leave. We're not safe here." Samuel's heart pounded as he helped Maya to her feet, his mind racing with questions. Who or what had his daughter become? And how far was he willing to go to keep her safe? The drive away from the shelter was tense and silent, the air in the car thick with unspoken questions. Samuel sat in the back seat with Maya, his hand gripping hers tightly as if he were afraid she might disappear again. She was trembling, her body pressed against his, seeking comfort in the presence of the father she hadn't seen in years. Carter was in the driver's seat, his eyes scanning the road ahead and the rear-view mirror with practiced precision, every movement betraying the sense of urgency he had yet to fully explain. Samuel's mind raced, torn between disbelief and the undeniable reality of what he'd seen. Maya's glowing eyes, the strange ripple in the air, none of it made sense. He was a man of science, a doctor who believed in facts and logic, yet nothing about the situation fit into the world he understood. His daughter was alive, but she wasn't the same Maya he lost, and that terrified him more than he could admit. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low and strained. "Where are we going?" Carter didn't look back as he answered. "Somewhere safe. There's a secure location not far from here. We can regroup there and figure out our next steps." "That's not an answer," Samuel snapped, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "You keep saying we need to protect her, but you haven't told me from what. Who are these people you're so worried about?" Carter hesitated, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "There's a group, an organization that operates in the shadows. They've been tracking individuals like Maya for years. Their goal is simple, to control and weaponize abilities like hers. If they find her, they won't care who she is or what she wants. They'll use her for their own agenda, and they won't stop until they've drained her of everything she has." Samuel's stomach churned at the thought. "How do you know all this?" he demanded. "How are you involved in any of this?" "I've been tracking them for a long time," Carter said, his voice grim. "I used to be one of them." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Samuel stared at the back of Carter's head, his pulse quickening. "You're telling me you work for these people, and now I'm supposed to trust you?" "I didn't say you had to trust me," Carter replied, his tone sharp. "But if you want to keep Maya safe, you don't have much of a choice." Maya shifted beside Samuel, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, he's telling the truth. I've seen them. Those people he's talking about. They're relentless. They don't care about anything but power. I've been running from them for months. Samuel's heart ached at the fear in her voice, but his mind was still reeling. He felt like he was being thrust into a world he didn't understand, a world where his daughter was hunted and nothing was as it seemed. He tightened his grip on her hand, silently vowing to protect her no matter what. The car turned off the main road and onto a narrow, winding path surrounded by dense trees. The headlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that flickered ominously in the periphery. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a small, unassuming cabin nestled deep in the woods. Carter parked the car and got out, motioning for them to follow. "This is it," he said. "It's off the grid. No one knows about this place." Samuel helped Maya out of the car, his eyes scanning their surroundings. The cabin looked weathered but sturdy, its windows dark and its door reinforced with heavy steel. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a bunker, a place designed for survival rather than comfort. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished, with only the bare essentials: a small kitchen, a single bed, and a table cluttered with papers and equipment. Carter moved quickly, closing the curtains and checking locks, his movements precise and methodical. Maya sank onto the couch, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had finally caught up to her. Samuel sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "I'm just tired. It's been so long since I felt safe." Carter cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "We need to talk," he said, pulling a chair over to face them. "There's a lot you don't know, Dr. Wright. About Maya, about what's happening to her." Samuel bristled at the implication. "She's my daughter. I know who she is." "Do you?" Carter asked, his gaze piercing. "Because the Maya you knew died 7 years ago. What came back isn't just her." Samuel's fists clenched, but before he could respond, Maya spoke up. "He's right, Dad," she said softly. "I don't feel the same. There's something inside me, something I don't understand. Sometimes it feels like it's helping me, protecting me, but other times it feels like it's taking over." "What do you mean?" Samuel asked, his voice filled with concern. Maya hesitated, then looked down at her hands. "There are moments when I lose control, when I feel this power building inside me. It's like a fire I can't put out. It scares me, Dad. I don't know what it is or how to stop it." Carter leaned forward, his expression serious. "That's why they want her," he said. "Because whatever this power is, it's rare, unique. And if they get their hands on it, they'll use it to cause destruction on a scale you can't imagine." Samuel stared at his daughter, his heart breaking at the pain in her eyes. He wanted to tell her it would be okay, that he would fix everything, but he didn't have the answers. All he had was a fierce determination to protect her, no matter what it took. Before he could speak, a loud bang echoed from outside, followed by the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Carter was on his feet in an instant, his hand moving to the concealed weapon at his side. "They found us," he said, his voice low and tense. "Get down. Stay quiet." Samuel's heart pounded as he pulled Maya close, his body shielding hers as Carter moved to the window. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the faint glow of flashlights cutting through the trees. Whoever these people were, they were closing in, and Samuel knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, every sound amplified by the silence that followed. Samuel's breath caught in his throat as he pressed Maya tightly to his chest, his ears straining to pick up anything beyond the growing crunch of footsteps outside. Carter's expression was grim, his movements deliberate as he slid silently to the window, peering out from behind the thick curtain. "They're here," Carter whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. 5, maybe 6 of them. Armed. They're fanning out. Samuel's pulse pounded in his ears. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to stay calm for Maya's sake. She clung to him, her breaths shallow, the small frame trembling against his. She wasn't a little girl anymore, but in that moment she felt as fragile as the day he had first held her in his arms. Carter motioned for them to move. "We can't stay here. There's a trapdoor in the back room. Leads to a tunnel that'll get us out of here." Samuel hesitated. "And what about you? You're not coming." "I'll hold them off," Carter said firmly. "Buy you as much time as I can." "No," Samuel said, his voice sharp. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone. You don't have a choice." Carter snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "Your job is to protect her. You can't do that if you're dead." Maya's voice broke through their tense exchange, small and laced with fear. "Dad, I don't want to lose you again." The words hit Samuel like a punch to the gut. His resolve wavered, but Carter was already moving, grabbing a rifle from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. He tossed a small flashlight to Samuel, his expression leaving no room for argument. "Go, now." Reluctantly, Samuel rose, taking Maya's hand and guiding her toward the back room. The cabin creaked under their hurried steps, every noise seeming louder than it should. Samuel's mind raced as they reached the narrow trapdoor Carter had described. He fumbled with the latch, his hands clumsy with urgency, before finally yanking it open. A ladder descended into the darkness below, the air damp and musty. Maya hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. "What if they find us down there?" "They won't," Samuel assured her, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "We'll be okay." She nodded, trusting him completely, and began to climb down. Samuel followed, his heart pounding as he pulled the trapdoor shut above them. The tunnel was narrow, the walls lined with rough stone, and the faint glow from the flashlight barely illuminated the way forward. He could hear Maya's breathing ahead of him, fast and uneven, and he wished he could do more to comfort her. Above them, the cabin erupted into chaos. Gunfire shattered the silence, followed by shouts and the heavy thud of boots. Samuel's grip on the flashlight tightened as he urged Maya forward, his voice low and urgent. "Keep moving. Don't stop." The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning with no end in sight. Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something or someone was just behind them. He glanced back over his shoulder, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Still, the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. "Dad," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "I feel it again. That thing inside me, it's getting stronger." Samuel's stomach tightened. He didn't know how to help her, didn't know how to fight whatever was happening to her. All he could do was keep moving forward, hoping they would find safety at the end of the tunnel. Behind them, the sounds of the fight grew fainter, but Samuel knew it wasn't over. Carter was buying them time, but he couldn't hold them off forever. If the people chasing them had gone to this much trouble to find Maya, they wouldn't stop now. They were relentless, and Samuel had no doubt they would follow them into the tunnel if it came to that. Maya suddenly stopped, her hand gripping his arm tightly. "Dad, wait." "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She pointed ahead, her eyes wide. "There's something up there. I can feel it." Samuel shone the flashlight forward, the beam catching on a faint shimmer in the air. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill down his spine. He stepped closer, his instincts screaming at him to turn back, but they had no other choice. They couldn't go back the way they came. As they approached, the shimmer grew more pronounced, taking on the shape of a faint, pulsing barrier. Maya clutched her necklace, her fingers curling around the small pendant. The glow from the stone intensified, casting an eerie light that seemed to resonate with the barrier ahead. "What is this?" Samuel murmured, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. "I don't know," Maya said, her voice trembling. "But it feels familiar, like it's connected to me somehow." Samuel reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against the barrier. The surface was cool to the touch, almost liquid, and it sent a jolt of energy through him. He pulled back quickly, his heart racing. Before he could say anything, the barrier began to shift, rippling as if in response to their presence. Maya stepped forward, her necklace glowing brighter with each step. Samuel's instincts screamed at him to stop her, but something about the look in her eyes held him back. She wasn't afraid, she was determined. The barrier parted before her, opening a narrow passage that seemed to lead into an even darker section of the tunnel. Maya turned back to him, her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. "I think we have to go through," she said. "It's the only way." Samuel hesitated, every fiber of his being screaming to turn back, to find another way. But there was no time, no other option. He nodded, taking her hand as they stepped through the barrier together. The air on the other side was different, heavier, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The flashlight flickered, its beam weak and unreliable, but they pressed on, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Somewhere behind them, Samuel could hear the distant sound of footsteps. Their pursuers had found the tunnel. Time was running out, and the danger was closer than ever. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, the air growing colder with each step. Samuel's grip on Maya's hand tightened as the faint sounds of pursuit echoed behind them, growing louder with every passing moment. The flashlight flickered again, the weak beam barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. Samuel could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the fear of being caught driving him forward even as doubts gnawed at the edges of his mind. How much further could they go before they ran out of options? Maya suddenly stopped, her body tensing as she pulled Samuel to a halt. "Do you get that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their labored breathing. Samuel froze, straining to listen. At first, all he could hear was the faint drip of water from the tunnel ceiling and the distant, ominous sounds of their pursuers. But then, faintly, he caught it. A low hymn, rhythmic and strange, coming from somewhere ahead. It was unlike anything he'd ever heard, a sound that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. "What is it?" he asked, his voice hushed. Maya shook her head, her fingers tightening around the glowing necklace at her throat. "I don't know," she said, "but it feels alive." The hum grew louder as they moved forward, the faint glow of Maya's necklace pulsing in sync with the sound. The walls of the tunnel seemed to shift subtly, the rough stone taking on an almost organic texture. Samuel's unease deepened, but he kept moving, driven by an unshakable need to protect his daughter. As they rounded a bend, the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with faintly glowing veins of light. At the center of the room stood a massive, crystalline structure, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly brilliance. The hum resonated from within the crystal, filling the chamber with a strange, almost hypnotic energy. Maya's steps faltered as she stared at the crystal, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "I'd seen this before," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel turned to her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Where?" "In my dreams," she said, her gaze fixed on the crystal. "Ever since I woke up, I'd seen this place. I thought it wasn't real, but now—" She trailed off, her hand brushing against the necklace as the glow intensified. Before Samuel could respond, the chamber was suddenly filled with a blinding flash of light. He shielded his eyes, his heart racing as a figure materialized before the crystal. At first, the figure was little more than a shadow, its edges shifting and indistinct. But as the light faded, it took on a more solid form, a tall, humanoid shape clad in flowing, silver-like robes that seemed to shimmer with their own light. The figure's face was obscured by a glowing mask, its voice echoing through the chamber as it spoke. "My right," it said, its tone calm but commanding. "You have come at last." Samuel stepped in front of Maya instinctively, his body tense with protectiveness. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want with her?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if amused by the question. "I am a guardian of the Nexus," it said, gesturing toward the crystal. "This is a place of immense power, and Maya is connected to it in ways you cannot yet understand." Samuel's mind reeled. "Connected how?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What does this have to do with her?" "She is a conduit," the figure replied, "a bridge between worlds. The energy within her is not of this earth, and it has drawn the attention of those who seek to exploit it. The ones who pursue you wish to harness this power for their own ends. If they succeed, the consequences will be catastrophic." Maya stepped out from behind Samuel, her expression resolute despite the fear in her eyes. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. "I didn't ask for any of this." The figure regarded her for a moment before responding. "The choice is not yours alone, but the path forward requires your strength. The Nexus has been dormant for centuries, but now it awakens, because of you." Before anyone could say more, the sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them, accompanied by shouts and the clatter of weapons. Samuel's blood ran cold. The pursuers had found them. The figure turned toward the tunnel, raising a hand as the crystalline veins in the walls began to glow brighter. A barrier of light sprang up at the entrance to the chamber, sealing them off from the approaching threat. For now. "They cannot enter this place," the figure said, its voice steady. "But the barrier will not hold forever. You must decide, Maya. Will you embrace your connection to the Nexus, or will you run from it?" Maya looked to Samuel, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Dad, what do I do?" Samuel's heart ached at the question. He wanted to tell her to run, to take her far away from all of this and keep her safe. But deep down, he knew that wasn't an option anymore. Whatever this Nexus was, whatever power it held, it was a part of her now, and running wouldn't change that. Before he could answer, the barrier flickered, cracks beginning to form in the glowing light. The shouts from the tunnel grew louder, more urgent, and Samuel knew they were running out of time. "You have to decide," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you, always." Maya swallowed hard, her gaze shifting between the figure, the crystal, and the weakening barrier. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, the hum of the Nexus growing louder as if urging her to act. But the question remained. Was she ready to face the truth of who or what she was? or would she risk everything by walking away?